welcome to Digital Transformation Leadership, today's session of the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series. I just want to thank our valued partner, Tech United NJ, previously known as the Tech Council of New Jersey. Tech United NJ empowers innovators, entrepreneurs, and instigators, and has been a very valued partner, and we thank them for their support. The Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series is a relatively new learning opportunity that brings our audience lessons of resilience, resourcefulness, responsibility, and reinvention through conversations with thought leaders and business leaders from across industry spectrums. It's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator. Sam Wilmot has more than 20 years of experience in complex technical environments with proven success in driving change. In her current role as Vice President and General Manager of Care AR, Sam is responsible for standing up management and operations of this new Xerox company. Care AR is an augmented reality visual support platform that helps organizations digitally transform their support experience. In addition to other responsible positions at Xerox, Sam has also previously held senior roles at Deutsche Bank and Morgan Stanley. Through her impressive career, Sam has created and led several women's professional networks and initiatives. Sam earned her Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Durham University and her Master's in Technology Management from Columbia University, where she recently began teaching. And Sam, I'm going to hand things over to you now to get started.
Thank you, Margaret, and to Rutgers Business School for providing us this opportunity to present to Rutgers students on the critical topic of digital transformation leadership. My name is Sam Wilmot, and I'm the General Manager of Care AR, a company Xerox recently acquired to drive transformation of the services industry. I have the honor of introducing your speaker today, Steve Bandzak. Steve is the President and COO of Xerox, a 115-year-old company that is not only showcasing its own digital transformation, but also providing tools and services to its customers to do the same. Steve has held many C-level positions and as well has achieved so much in his career that will leave you wondering how he fitted it all in. Steve does many speaking engagements, and you will shortly find out why you're going to be lucky to be attending this event. Steve is a mentor and a coach to many people, myself included. He is incredibly generous in his teaching and growing of many people around him. So I will now hand over to your speaker, Steve, and then we'll be back to moderate questions to Steve, and then we will open to Q&A. So over to you, Steve.
Sam, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and my thanks to Margaret and the Rutgers Business School. And so I'm going to take the next 20 minutes and really just take you through some of the lessons that both I have learned through my career, as well as things that we're doing here at Xerox, not as a highlight for what we're doing here at Xerox, but give you examples of how to think about digital transformation leadership. And if we just take a step back for a second, there's a couple of key gems I'm going to give to you during this presentation, and certainly I'll try to cover them again through the Q&A. But one of the things I want you to think about today is the slowest technology will ever be in your lifetime. Think about that. Today is the slowest technology and change you'll ever be in your lifetime. And over my career, and we go back, 30 plus years as a C-level executive, every year the pace and rate of change gets faster and faster. And so when we think about digital transformation and we think about disruption, the one thing that is going to be constant, and that is that we need leadership to be able to understand how this disruption is happening, how technology will impact us, and more importantly, how do you lead companies, lead organizations, lead through this type of transformation? So over the next 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to take you through what we're doing here at Xerox, but more importantly, I'm going to start to give you some insight to some skills and think of things that hopefully you're working on and things that you're doing either here at Rutgers Business School or in your own professional and personal career. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've recently seen is the pandemic. And if you think about the pandemic that we're all going through is a disruptor. Now, disruptors happen in a lot of different ways. Obviously, we saw a year ago and what's happening in the world, economic disruption. We've seen disruptions in industries. We've seen disruptions in a lot of different areas as it relates to the pandemic. in and around the world, and we've seen so much change. We've seen a tremendous amount of disruption, both in economies, in the way companies serve, in the way companies do business. But the reality is, it is a disruptor. No different than we saw a dot-com bust, or we see a technology disruptor. No different than we see a social uprise, we see a social disruption. Think about our own personal lives today in terms of how we've seen disruption from technology. You think of your Amazon experience, you think of your Uber experience. All of those are disruptors. And the key message here is that the way in which we deal with the disruption, the way in which we see it, the way in which we react to it, you can have one or two outcomes. You can be a victim of that disruptor, or you can lead and drive and take advantage of that disruption. And we've seen over the last year, some actual economies and some actual companies have actually thrived during this disruption. We've seen companies accelerate change, things that they would have done in 3 years, they're doing in 3 months. Just think about this time last year, every single major company in the world, now you have to deal with people working from home. And in my company, 26,000 plus employees, day one, go work from home. IT infrastructure, processes, securities, all the things you need to put in place in order for that to happen. Some companies accelerated things that they were doing for years. You think about how we're doing this conference now on video. Video conferencing and these technologies have been around for a long time. The reality is we're now getting normal in terms of adopting and getting used to how do we leverage these technologies. The disruption of people working from home accelerated the use of video. You accelerated the use of this type of communications for teaching, distance learning, etc. And so my first message to you is, how do you prepare yourself and get ready for these types of disruptions? I can tell you there was no playbook to deal with the pandemic. There's still no playbook today for how you deal with some of the things that we still need to think about, whether it's vaccinations, getting people back to work. What is consistent, though, is how you lead through that. And what are the skills you need to lead to get through those things? So the first thing I want you to write down is the one skill that will be timeless over the life of your career. And I don't care whether you're just graduating from school and you got a 40-year career ahead of you, or you've been around like I have and you may have 10 more years left, it does not matter. The one skill that will be consistent is leadership through disruption. Individuals that can understand and can see and visualize disruption and drive companies through that, drive your divisions, drive your organizations, are going to be the successful leaders in the future. Next slide, please. So as you start to think about the pandemic and what it's accelerating, I'm not going to go through these slides, you'll get a copy of this, but the reality is what we've seen is an incredible acceleration of what companies were doing in digital disruption. They went from 3-year cycles to 30-day cycles. I talked about video working from home. That could have been 3 years we were on that journey to get everybody with the capabilities with video conferencing to work down to every single employee. Maybe it's now 3 days that we had to deal with it. And so we're seeing the acceleration and a disruption of industries, but it's been tremendously accelerated. Some companies have succeeded and have been very successful in this model. Some leaders are very comfortable with this type of disruption, see what the possibility is and drive positive change. Other companies just let it happen to them. And I don't care whether it's a nonprofit or a profit, I don't care whether you're a government agency, schools, industries, you think about universities and schools, they were not ready for this transformation. I teach at Columbia University as part of the master's program. I can tell you, we were not ready for this distance learning at the magnitude and the scale and the pace in which it happened. But we adjusted and we got that infrastructure in place, and we now have a much better engine than we would have had a year ago had we had done it in the normal pace and change. Next slide, please. So one of the things I want you to think about is disruption happens when a new approach meets the right conditions. What do I mean by that? use video conferencing. Video conferencing has been around for a long time. Video conferencing to reduce travel, video conferencing to be able to get people to collaborate. You saw Zoom, you saw what's happening with Microsoft and Teams. You could see what's happening with Cisco's solution. You know, pick your solution of choice. And the reality is the adoption of those solutions accelerated when that approach met the right conditions. And so what we're going to constantly see going forward is there are ideas, there are technologies, there is innovation that's been sitting around for a long time. And the reality is you've got to put that together when the conditions are right. Second thing I'd like you to think about and write down is, how do I know when the conditions are right? Am I leading through that change, or am I going to follow and be a follower of that change? How do I sense the conditions are turning? How do I sense when the conditions are right? Next slide, please. So when we think about Xerox, and this is a real world example, and I wanted to highlight this because this time last year, we're sitting here at Xerox and we're saying, how do we take care of our employees? What are the things that we can do to take care of our employees? What are the things that we can do to take care of the industries and the communities that we play in? Our life cycle and our particular printers, if you know Xerox, we're in a large print industry, and our life cycle on our products in terms of ideas to manufacturing to creation to getting into the market is roughly a 3-year life cycle. And so when we hit this time last year, one of the big challenges, if everybody remembers, was how do we get ventilators? We don't have enough ventilators. Hospitals are being overwhelmed. We're seeing people passing and dying because they don't have ventilators. And we said, one of the things we can do here at Xerox is how do we help with this ventilator situation? And so literally from zero, meaning it was never in our plans, to 6 weeks later, we generated the go-to vent. We generated the APM, which regulates the flow of air into the go-to vent. 6 weeks. Now think about that for a second. Here's a company that's been around for 100 years, has manufactured print devices, the life cycle and the turn of our products 3 years. And we did it in 6 weeks without having any engineering, any IP, anything behind it. How did that happen? How did we disrupt ourselves to go from a 3-year life cycle to 6-week life cycle? By the way, great news, we just shipped 30,000 of these to India over the weekend. 30,000. So when you talk about the timing and you talk about how do you disrupt yourself, how do you change, how do you build something? What are the things you do to get the management team and get everybody aligned to going from a 3-year life cycle to a 6-week life cycle? And the reality is, it was life and death. The reality is, it started at the CEO level that says, I will not take no for an answer. We have a problem to solve. We are going to solve it. We're going to bring the best and brightest and everything that Xerox can bring, and we're going to solve this problem. So when you talk about disruption and you think about how do we radically change and disrupt things, do you have that type of focus when you're thinking about disruption? Does your company have that type of disruption? And so the question that comes back to me now is, Steve, if you can do this in 6 weeks, what are you doing with the rest of your business? What other things are you creating? And what are the other things that you're doing to be able to take and harness the same type of activity and do it in your normal course of business? Because I'll argue that, yes, it was the pandemic, and yes, it's the horrific environment that we're in, and we had the pressure of how do we save lives, but we did it by not doing things the same old way. We did it by reinventing and changing the way in which we thought about life cycle management, the way in which we thought about manufacturing. Tremendously different. Second example I'm going to highlight for you. Next slide, please. So the other thing that was happening was our workforce had to go out and had to be dealing with the environments that we're in. where you had to go and we had critical infrastructure. I don't know if anybody remembers, but the Navy ships that came into New York and came into Los Angeles, the Navy health ships that were the floating hospitals to try to help with the overflow in New York and LA. Xerox was part of the teams and part of the companies that went in and outfitted those ships. Now think about that for a second. We don't have any of the data that we have today around the COVID and the virus. We don't have any data about how do you keep your employees safe. But we know we've got to go into these environments. By the way, we've got equipment that's running that companies do not want us on site. And so we accelerated some of the capabilities that we had at Xerox. We had in our Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, our labs, we had IP around augmented and virtual reality. We had technology that allowed us to do things remotely, and we acquired this little company called CareAR. Fast forward, we launched a complete new product, a service disruptor. How do we disrupt the service industry in a totally different way than the way service was done before? Doing it through technology, doing it through augmented and virtual reality, IoT capabilities, Internet of Things, analytics. And the reality is we've created an incredible market disruptor that you're seeing us go to market now with ServiceNow. That never would have happened in a traditional way in which we have done it. Next slide, please. And so if you start to think about the disruptor and these technologies coming together to solve a real world problem, we have addressed significant customer challenges. And I'm not going to make this a commercial from CareAR, I'll let you go read it yourselves. But the important point on this conversation is the traditional way in which we would have done it at Xerox, this would have taken years. And yet we launched it, built it, came up to speed, and I can tell you after Q1, building a pipeline of customers and solving customer problems that is beyond my expectations. That never would have happened if we had done things the traditional way. So second thing I want you to write down is disruption requires different thinking. Disruption requires you have to have a sense of urgency around the mission and focus on that mission, and everything else in terms of the way you've done things in the past needs to change significantly. Next slide, please. And so when we start to think about disruption, and I like to use these logos and put them in the back of my head for a couple of reasons. Number one, the consumer world, every one of these areas in your own personal life is setting an expectation around what good looks like. Amazon experience. Think about the way in which you order with Amazon. Think about the way product shows up at your house, gets returned. You think about Netflix. How do you view content? Well, you view it in the device that you want at the time that you want. You view it in the air. You view it in your car. It does not matter. I want to be able to see content the way I want it in the form that I want it. By the way, I want to be able to back up. I want to be able to look at and go to any point in that contact, that video and that content anytime that I wish. This is changing the expectation of what our customers are looking for. The consumer world and the enterprise are colliding. So disruption in every one of our industries is going to happen. And it's going to be set by these disruptors setting customer expectation. What does good look like? What does it look like when you've got an Uber or a Lyft experience? Why does Uber and Lyft challenge the automotive industry? It didn't just challenge the taxi industry, it challenged the automotive industry. Why is GM having the largest number of people investing in IP in Silicon Valley? Because it's all about the experience in the future. It is not just the transportation. Next slide, please. And so some companies get it, some companies don't. I'll let you take a look at this slide when you get a chance, but you take a look at Barnes & Noble versus Amazon. 1994, take a look at Amazon's share price. Take a look at Amazon's share price and go all the way down to where it is today. I'll let you do the study on your own. Take a look at the number of internet users in 1994. Take a look at where it is today. By the way, only 60% of the world is on the internet today. 40% is still out on the internet, still doesn't have access. You think Amazon still has room to grow? Alibaba still has room to grow? That's why their share price is so high. And so what are the technologies that we need to be thinking about that are going to disrupt us in the future? Next slide, please. So if you think about your business, do you have a strategy around how these technologies are going to disrupt, how they're going to play, how they're going to accelerate new business models within your company? AI is here to stay. You can argue with me about AI in terms of some of it's spooky. I do some things on Google, and all of a sudden it now brings up the last 5 things I shopped for on another website. Yeah, the reality is when it brings the right thing up and it gives you insight to what you're looking for, you're happy. But when it brings you something that spooks you a little bit, you get nervous. AI is here to stay. The reality is today, companies are going to move at the speed of software. They're going to move at the speed of software. So whether it's around augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, predictive analytics, machine learning, robotics, it does not matter. It's going to move at the speed of software. And so what we're going to start to see is these technologies like AI has been around a long time, is now going to become not only pervasive, but it's going to become expected in our businesses and our processes. Next slide, please. Other technologies, automation in and around robotics, automation in and around machine learning, automation in and around the IoT and the Internet of Things. These are creating tremendously new platforms to change business models. We just launched a new company and a joint venture with the Australian government. Go take a look, it's called LOQ. And the reality is what we're now looking at is Xerox in the bridge maintenance business. Sensors on bridges in Australia with our analytics to sense and look at what is the actual amount of both wear and tear on a bridge so that you don't have to send somebody physically to go look at that. Then using drone technology, so we keep people out of harm's way, using drones to go take a look at whether the bridge actually has a crack, needs to be repaired, et cetera. How many bridges around the world do we have that could use that where we don't have to send people? We can use technology, IoT and analytics to determine how the wear and tear is on a bridge. And so we're going to see all these different models, and we're going to see all these different technologies disrupting airline industries, hotel industries, pick your industries of choice. Next slide, please. We're going to see it in edge computing. You're going to see more and more technologies move to the edge. 5G is going to be prevalent. You're going to see more sensor technologies and controls, sensors built into all of our home devices, our vehicles. The reality is today, technology is going to change industries. So the question is, next slide, please. What are you doing about it? What's your company doing about it? Are you challenging yourself to think differently? Are you transforming, or are you waiting for the industry to be transformed? Are you driving a transformation in your industry, transformation in your processes, a transformation in your company, or are you waiting for it to happen? Are you challenging yourself? I will tell you, I don't look at my traditional competitors today. I didn't do it when I was at HP. I don't do it here. I look at the non-traditional ones. What are the ones that are going to absolutely disrupt our industry in a non-traditional way? Nobody thought about Xerox in the service disruption business less than 2 months ago. I promise you they're thinking of us now. Same thing in bridge and IoT capabilities. Dramatically shifting. We're not waiting for things to happen to us. We're out front driving that disruption. Next slide, please. So one of the things we always ask, individuals always ask me is, Steve, I got these great ideas, but how do I change the board and change the C-level executives' mind around adopting some of these solutions? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I can tell you, when you go into a CEO's office, or you go into a boardroom, or you go into a C-level exec, they look at these 4 things: revenue, cash, operating profit, EPS. Everything I just described in a disruption drives revenue, drives cash, drives operating profit, drives new business model. So for those of you in the business school and have a tech background, it's not a technology presentation, it's not a technology disruptor, It's a business disruptor that you need to be able to have and bring it down to a P&L level to be able to sell to C-level executives. Next slide, please. One of the things you need to think about is, how do I drive best-in-class thinking? So, real simple example today, if you think about the acquisition cost of a customer for Amazon, it's probably almost zero. And now I'm in the retail stores and I think about, what does it take me to market to bring a customer into the store? I have a dramatically different value proposition. And so you need to understand your operating metrics and how you tie that to best-in-class thinking, receivables, payables, sales cycle times. And I'm sure you're learning all this in your Rutgers Business School, but really important to be able to do this. And as you're driving and think about disruption and thinking about new business models, you got to be able to turn it into actionable P&Ls. You got to be able to action it where you can sit down in front of the board and be able to actually get that decision, get that idea into the C-level executive. Next slide, please. I'm going to close with this, and then we're going to go to the Q&A portion. Nothing happens without leadership. Nothing happens without leadership. And I get this question all the time. Steve, what leadership skills do I need? And I'm going to give it to you on the next slide, but I want to give you a couple of things to think about. Number one, think about running a marathon. Think about playing an instrument. How do you get really, really good in a marathon? How do you get really good at playing an instrument? And I get the same answer. Steve, you practice every day. You want to run a 26-mile marathon, which I've done several times. You know when it starts. Not when you run the marathon. It's a year before you actually run it. When you run that marathon, it's anticlimactic because all the hard work, all the training has been done. Same thing when you play an instrument. Think about how it sounds the first time you do it. On a violin, you get those really ugly sounds until you can get it flow. And when you think about leadership, it's the same way. You've got to work on your leadership skills every day. Steve, what leadership skills? Next slide, please. So in order for you to drive disruption, you've got to be able to have these types of attributes. Urgency. Think about what I described with the ventilator. Think about what I described with CareAR. Was there a sense of urgency? Yes, there was. We needed to be able to save people's lives. We needed to be able to help people. We needed to be able to help our employees. You got to be fearless. You think it's easy to go tell a CEO that we're going to go and take 6 months, 1 year to create a ventilator when I got people that are dying every day? No, you got to be fearless and say, we're going to get it done in 6 weeks, boss. You got to have the tenacity. You got to have the capability to do it. You got to have a strategic mindset. You got to be fearless. You think about somebody like an Elon Musk. Yeah, I don't care whether you like Elon or not. I've met him several times. The guy's a nut job. But here's what I love about him. He's convicted about what he is doing. Think about SpaceX. I'm going to take a rocket, put it up. I'm going to bring it back to the ground. And I'm going to reuse it. That doesn't make any sense to anybody? Of course it does. We had the space program for how many years? Send it up, blow it up. Elon's like, hey, why would you do that? If you follow him in California, there's a program around California rail. And he's going like, why would you invent something that's slower than the fastest rail system we have today? Why wouldn't you invent a rail system that's faster than what we see in the air today? Why would you do that? Why would you go to mediocrity? Why wouldn't you build something that's better than we already have today? And he has the vision of being able to see it and then the confidence to be able to get it done. Strategic mindset, being fearless, and having a sense of urgency. Last one I'll highlight, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sam. Communication, communications, communications. If you communicate something about your idea, you communicate something about your disruption, and somebody says, I don't understand it, you know whose fault it is? Your fault. It's your fault. It's like me going to China when I did the IBM PC spin out and I helped build Lenovo and I went into China. I was giving them all kinds of things in the Western world in terms of examples. You think they understood? Whose fault was that? My fault. All right. And so if somebody doesn't understand, CEO doesn't understand, board doesn't understand, doesn't get your idea, doesn't get what you're trying to do, it's your fault. You're not communicating in their language. So I hope this is valuable. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A in a second, but take these charts. This leadership skills, important. Take the 2 case studies that I did about Xerox in terms of how we went about driving disruption, how we created that sense of urgency. That's how you drive disruption. That's how you drive change. And be fearless. When you're a leader, it's lonely. When you're leading something, the reason why you're a leader is because there's nobody left and nobody right of you. So if you've got an idea and you're communicating, it feels like you're all alone, you're probably onto the right idea. Sam, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Steve. So many aspects that you dove into that I'm sure the audience is grateful to have heard from you on today. So I'm going to start our question session with the focus on the 4 guiding principles of leadership at Rutgers Business School: resilient, resourceful, responsible, and reinvent. So let's start with resilience, Steve. Resilience, the ability to persevere and work through adversity. Steve, can you talk to us about a notable time or times when it seemed that adversity could get the better of the situation and what perseverance tactics you used?
Yeah, there's so many examples, Sam, but I think the best one I'll give you, and it's the one time in my career where I truly have failed, and that was I was at Nortel when it went into bankruptcy. I was hired by a guy named Mike Zaborowski, came out of GE, Motorola, one of the best thinkers in the world, to try to get Nortel turned around. I was there about 2 years, and we went into bankruptcy. And I won't give you all the gory details, but bankruptcy is one of the hardest things you ever had to lead through. People, personal, I mean, it's just really horrific. And it's there that you learned about your integrity. While we went into bankruptcy, I had an opportunity to go and take a CIO level job at a very large bank in New York City. And anybody who's ever been a CIO at a bank, pretty prestigious job, much more money than I was making. When you go into bankruptcy, there's no bonus, your stock isn't worth anything. And I went home and I told my wife, I said, you know, Steve Randich, who was at the particular bank, he wants to hire me. And she says, you're not leaving. You're not leaving. You got a company to save and you got people to save jobs. And when you talk about resiliency and you talk about, you know, how do you persevere personally, professionally, and you challenge your own integrity around staying versus leaving, that was the hardest time in my career. I will tell you, through that 2-year journey, it was the best life lesson I had ever had around how do you save a company, how do you build a company. We ultimately sold Nortel Enterprise to Avaya. I went over to Avaya, became the president of the network group, and the rest is history. So resiliency and how you deal through that. I will tell you the other thing, when you're going through personal challenge, for those of you who are in management roles, your team is looking for you to lead. Your team is looking for you to be the bright star every day. I could have came in and said, poor me, I'm not getting my bonus, we're not getting paid. No, I had to come in energized every day. I had to come in and lead the team every day. So when we talk about resiliency, that's probably the best example I have.
Great, thank you very much for that. That's an amazing answer and really great insight there. So let's move on to resourceful, the ability to think creatively and collaboratively to solve difficult problems. So Steve, what could you recommend people do in order to develop their creativity in solving business problems?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, you know, build a staff, build a team around you that are like nails on a blackboard. Okay, and I got people on my staff, and I won't say who they are, that are nails on a blackboard to me. Okay, because they have a completely different opposite thought than I do. But that diversity creates tremendous strength. That diversity creates tremendous creativity. All right. If you're working with a group and everybody sounds like a great choir, you don't have enough diversity. So make sure you've got enough diverse thinking. Make sure you got enough nails on the blackboard as part of your overall thinking and your think tank that challenges you, challenges everybody. Now, you got to get them all on the same page and they got to be harmonious in terms of how they lead. But at least on the initial brainstorming, at least on the initial idea and the creativity, innovation never comes from everybody who thinks alike.
Right.
Never. It's never going to happen. If we're all thinking alike, there is no innovation. Okay, so you must have that type of diversity. You must have that type of nails on the blackboard.
Great. And I think Xerox is a really good example of that. As you say, the management team you've got around you and just generally Xerox, the amount of creativity that comes out, but it comes out through that diverse set of people around you. So great. So responsible, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, but I just want to just touch on it again. So exercising ethical judgment and decision-making when the right choice is maybe not the popular decision. So Steve, what would you advise the students here today about how to get to the right choice when it is not necessarily going to be a popular one?
Yeah, listen, it gets harder and harder the further up in management you get, whether it's around data privacy, EU, GDPR, you think about all these different regulations, you think about the different thinking, right? I've got employees that have been here 30 years think a lot different than employees that join right out of school. Totally different value propositions, different value systems, different purposes of working. And so you're constantly going through those choices, all right? My North Star is do the right thing for the company, do the right thing for your employees, everything else will work out. Everything else will work out. And there hasn't been a time in my career when we've done the right thing that it hasn't worked out in the right time. Okay, you may catch a lot of noise, you may catch a lot of heat, but if you know in your heart that it's the right thing to do, be convicted and stand behind it.
Great answer. And I can tell you, I think that shines through in leadership as well. I think the employees around see that, and they trust the management team and yourself, Steve. So say thank you on behalf of them for that. And then last R, reinvent, having the mindset that the learning journey of life is never ending. So Steve, couple of questions. Why is a learning mindset important? And then can you tell us about what resources you leverage to keep learning?
Yeah, well, if you think about today, the world is changing at a rate and pace that we've never seen before. Technology, it is so fast. Okay, and I've been around technology my whole life. There are things that just change so fast today. I mean, I have reverse mentors. For those who don't know what a reverse mentor is, it's somebody who mentors me, okay? And the reason, and it's not somebody who's got 60 years business experience, it is somebody who is right out of school who thinks totally different. And when you first start that relationship, they think it's crazy, okay? But I can tell you example after example where somebody has brought me applications, somebody has brought me information, somebody has brought me something that I never even thought of before. Never even thought of, okay? And so I talked about leadership and how do you become a great leader? You work and you practice every day. Same thing about learning. You take some of the great minds in the world. You take a look at a Bill Gates, you take a look at a Warren Buffett. Today, they read books every single day. It's the one common thing they always talk about. We constantly absorbing information, constantly absorbing more and more, all right? It's not just about book reading. It's about getting input, getting different ideas, all right? Our community changing dramatically, all right, in terms of where technology and where disruptors are coming from. I come from some of the biggest technology companies in the world. You take a look at HP. Last years that I was there with Meg took $300 million out of HP's R&D budget and put it into startups. Why did she do that? Because the VC funds, the startups, were coming up with ideas faster than the traditional R&D team could do at HP. She recognized I needed to get more input into innovation, more input into the disruptors. I was not getting it with just the teams that I had internally.
Great stuff. Thank you, Steve. And that we've actually got quite a lot of questions. So I'm going to now go through what we've got. We had one question submitted before the event, and then I'm going to read off the other ones that have come in. So the first one, which was submitted before the event, which was, what has Xerox done to advance their digital transformation? And I know you went through this earlier through the slides, but maybe there's anything else you might want to add to that before we move on to the next question, Steve?
I think the first thing is a mindset. And the biggest mindset is we have said we are going to disrupt the service industry and we're going to deliver service like nobody else in the industry has. And with that consumer mindset collapsing, colliding with the enterprise. So if you think about, you take my products in the field, how do I connect to them via IoT? I got 11 million devices that we connect to. How do I get that IoT information How do I bring it back and correlate it so that when a service technician shows up in the field with Care AR, we can automatically bring to them what the solution is to go solve it. You know, you take a look at our technicians in any industry, not just Xerox, but if you got 30 years of experience and I show up, you probably get a great experience in terms of that product being fixed the first time. If you're only 30 days on the job and you show up without any technology, without any help, how are you going to get the same experience as somebody with 30 years experience? Technology and capabilities, and when we talk about service disruption, that's what we're talking about. How do I bring that same set of intellectual property knowledge, bring it to somebody who's on a job for 30 days? And by the way, bring it to them in a format that allows them to learn. Think about when you go to Home Depot, you buy a grill, you bring the grill home. The last thing you do is look at the instructions. You get on YouTube and you get somebody who knows how to take you through it step by step on a video. Well, that's what we deliver to our technicians in the field. Top 3, top 5 issues in terms of how you solve it. We do it through a video. And now we're using modern consumer ways in which people want to absorb information. All right, so we're accelerating transformation, moving more to the cloud in terms of our applications and our differentiation. But it's a mindset that decisions and the way in which we move has to move at the speed of software, dramatically different than many, many OEM companies historically.
Right, I'm going to go to the first question that we received today on the event, which came from Kabir Bindra. So the pandemic has created a cascade of disruption, especially when it comes to the supply chain of certain industries, lumber, bikes, chips, etc. What is your point of view on leading through disruption when there are multiple disruptions from multiple angles? How do you look beyond just meeting demand and think about innovation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And, you know, the root of your question is a couple of different things. And one is, okay, so how do you diversify your supply chain? How do you think about the future supply chain? So some of the disruptions we're seeing today, whether it's around transportation capacity, whether it's around what we're seeing in terms of labor shortages in certain parts of the world, that will get better. And that will get back to, you know, I'll call more of a normal set of capacity. But the reality is it gives us a chance to think. It gives us a chance to dramatically rethink how we think about supply chain. We launched a 3D device going back in Q1 that we now can create 3D parts, metallic parts in 3D printer. Now, do I really need to have something developed and manufactured in another part of the world when I can do it real time on site? I think about my supply chain totally differently. So embedded in your supply chain question, obviously logistics, obviously inventory carrying costs, obviously where you manufacture, but I now have different ways of doing things. Can I actually do it through 3D printing? Is there a different way with additive manufacturing to change my supply chain and change my supply chain partners? Can I think differently? By the way, some of the biggest infrastructure players in the world, whether it be Alibaba or whether it be Amazon, do I look at them as a supply chain provider? Probably not, but you know what? They could be. So how do you start to think about these other disruptions and the other ways in which you think about your supply chain? All right. Supply chains are all about supply and demand. And the way we used to build them is we used to say companies compete in supply chain, no more. Software is what is different in supply chain. How do you think about what I talked about a little bit earlier on the bridges? That dramatically changed my supply chain. IoT sensors in homes, when you look for gas leaks or you look for different types of things that are happening in the home using sensor technology, that changes my supply chain. All right. And so we got these different technologies and we got different ways of thinking about supply chain. Without knowing your specific industry and where you're coming from, I can't answer it 100%, but that's how I would be thinking about supply chain disruption in the future.
Great. Question from Nori Dua. Since the possibilities of harnessing new technology and entering new markets is really infinite, how can you most effectively evaluate and determine which ones your company should specifically pursue?
So I think there's a couple of pieces there. First of all, I wouldn't advise everybody to go like way, way out of their comfort zone. Everything I talked about with Xerox, with the ventilators, what we did with Care AR, there's a reason why we were able to do those things. We had tremendous manufacturing capabilities with the ventilators. We had a tremendous supply chain already. So we had pieces that we leveraged. We didn't design the ventilator. We got that design and we brought it in and manufactured it. On CareAR, you had some assets in Palo Alto. For those of you who know, Palo Alto Research Center is still one of the premier research centers in the world. We had tremendous IP in there around AR, VR, around what we can do with analytics, what we can do with AI technology. And we took those and we built a new model. So the first thing I would say is don't go too far and crazy outside of your comfort zone from the perspective of capabilities you have. Do you have a good go-to-market? Do you have a good supply chain? Do you have IP that you can leverage? Then you can start to build some of these new disruptors and some of these new capabilities.
Great. And from Heather Crum, the question is, tips for influencing others, how to get others to think differently?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about it. And the first thing is, when you think about what I described on the ventilators here at Xerox, the North Star was we're going to save lives. Simple, easy. One of the things visionaries have is the ability to be able to paint the future very simple, very easy, and make people believe that where they are going is better than where they are today. All right? So having the ability to communicate the future, simple, it's better than where you are today to where I'm going. Because the path between where you are and where you're going is hard. It's not easy. It's difficult. And so what you have to think about is, why do I want to work that hard? I go back to the marathon announcement. Why did I train so hard for the marathon? Because I couldn't wait to break the ribbon and say I finished one. The New York City Marathon, I did it. Why did I train a whole year? In rain, in snow, all the things that I went through, because it was that moment. All right. And the reason why you persevere, the reason why you work so hard is because that end vision. Why are you training? I want to finish a marathon. I want to finish it under 4 hours, whatever your goal is. Why do you work so hard in working on a violin or whatever the instrument is of choice? And it sounds so bad for the first couple of years, because I want to be, and I want to sound like this. All right. So the key thing is setting a vision. Number one, easy and simple, can't be complicated. And then having the confidence and the ability to be able to lead people from where they are today to that new vision.
Great. And I have a similar question. How do you get buy-in from the other leaders around you when the issue you are trying to resolve by implementing a new technology is not necessarily one of their priority, or when they don't see the issue is urgent?
Yeah, so look, I think the key is who you're speaking to, okay? When I go and I'm talking to the CFO about change, how do I talk to a CFO? I talk to a CFO in a P&L, and I think about the financial world. That's really what he or she cares about. When I talk about sales and I talk about transition and transformation for sales, how does it help drive my sales? How does it help make me better? So think about the audience and the people and the groups that you're talking to. How do you make their life better? One of the things that is really, really important is when I'm listening to somebody who's presenting, why is it worth my time? Why should I be listening to you? It's always a lot easier when you're going to make my life better, when you're going to make my function better, when you're going to make my company better. All right. And so when you're trying to communicate an idea, think about who is receiving what you're trying to sell and communicate, and make sure they understand the benefit in their language and in their area that is their function or their particular part of the company.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. So let's change the topic just slightly. And I've got a couple of questions here on about an agile organization and product-centric teams. And the question is, what are your thoughts on agile and product-centric teams? And do they work in all kinds of organizations, or is it just fit for a certain type of organization?
The question is a wrong one. Okay, we always get hung up on, traditional water flow, agile. Who cares? Who cares? Right? What is it you're trying to achieve? How fast are you trying to achieve it? What's the goal? And then what are the techniques to go get you there? It doesn't matter. Agile. If agile is the right set of tools and capabilities to get you to end goal faster and delivers what you want and it's disruptive, fantastic. All right, so I never get hung up on the process, the methodology. There's a lot of good ones out there. But you think about how many people who have implemented agile programs and failed, or how many used it and was successful. What's the difference between the two? Because agile was bad, it was a wrong process? Heck no. Heck no. All right? The same thing with your traditional cloud software. How many people have implemented ServiceNow, have been incredibly successful? People have installed it, didn't change. Same thing with SAP, Salesforce. I'm not highlighting any particular software company. It doesn't matter. What matters is how you use it and how you change it, and did you achieve the goals you were looking for? That's the key. All right, so yes, agile, great process. I got it. I'm not poo-pooing agile. But my important point is, what is it you're trying to achieve, and what is the best way of getting it?
So, similar question in a way from Paul Cox, which is, do you have any tips on how to deal with the pushback to disruption from a large team with the response or an attitude of, this is how we've always done it? Yeah,
look, the first and the hardest thing I had to get through when I got here at Xerox is telling everybody who have been successful here for 25, 30 years, that everything they've done for the last 25 and 30 years is going to put us out of business in the next 25 and 30 years. That's hard. That's really hard. Really difficult. When people have been so successful, been promoted, have been rewarded, and have done things a way in which today we know is completely backwards and completely anti to where we're trying to go, that's a hard thing to do. And by the way, there are some people that will change, some people that will never change, and some people just need convincing change. All right? The ones that will never change, those are what I call the blockers. Those are the ones that dramatically drag down and slow your progress, unfortunately. Those are the naysayers. Those are the difficult ones. All right? You want to reward the individuals that drive success. And by the way, if they fail, reward them for failure. Fail fast, move quick. That's really hard, by the way. But you have to reward people for thinking differently. You got to reward people for doing things differently and then move fast.
Yeah. Excellent. And then we have another question, which is from Raymond Liu, which is, what are the most important things to think about when building a global strategy as opposed to a US-based one?
I think everybody thinks they understand global. Okay, just because you have a global team does not mean you understand global. And I'll give you a real simple personal example. When I did the IBM PC spin out, that'll be the last question I answer because I think we're running up against time. When I did the IBM PC spin out and I put together the Lenovo team, Lenovo was a Beijing-based company, had all of their employees that had been in Beijing, never left China. When we brought over the IBM team, I had a team in Shenzhen. IBM culture, IBM train. Those two teams I could not put together. Virtually impossible to put together. I was there about 6 weeks and we were doing a big SAP cutover in the Lenovo business in China, in Beijing very specifically. And we had to shut down the company for a couple of days because we were doing a big language conversion, big financial conversion. We were going from, from Chinese currency to US currency, et cetera. Big, big transformation. And at the time, SAP had what we call a transport problem, meaning when you take something from development or you take something from staging, put it into production, sometimes you put the wrong code into production. Okay, and so on a Wednesday night, we were getting ready, the next day we were getting ready to cut over. I warned the team in China and basically said, be careful, SAP's got this problem. If we do it wrong, we're going to be halfway into the cutover and we're going to find out and then we're going to have to roll everything back. Sure enough, I get a call on a Saturday night. They moved the wrong code into production. We had 2 days additional that we were going to be off the air. So now I had to call the CEO, I had to call the chairman, basically say, look, we're going to be out of business for 2 days. My conversation on that call with the engineering team, with all the people responsible for it, is I was looking at it from a US Western point of view. And I can tell you I was not happy. had some interesting words. And so I got on a flight the next day, which I was flying to China, landing in Beijing. I get to the office, and there was a gentleman who actually made the error called JJ, one of the engineers. And I said, "Where is JJ?" And they said to me, "JJ is no longer with the company." And I said, "What do you mean JJ is no longer with the company?" "Yeah, he's not here anymore." I said, "We were just talking to him 48 hours ago." "Yeah, Steve, he's not here, he's gone." What happened to JJ? And so the reality is they had let JJ go because JJ dishonored Steve, the C-level executive. And I said, "You get JJ's butt back in here. We're not letting him go." Had all kinds of challenges. I won't talk about the details between local HR in China and the managing director in China, and then ultimately up to Steve Ward, who was the CEO of the company at the time, and basically said, "JJ's got to come back." And the reason being was I wanted to send a culture, it is okay to make a mistake, just don't make it twice. Because I was trying to drive that empowerment. I was trying to drive that thinking into the local Beijing team that it is okay to think. It is okay to do things. Don't sit there and wait for me to do it. And by the way, if you make a mistake, it's okay. We're not going to fire you for making a mistake. We're not going to let you do it multiple times, but you're not going to get fired for making a mistake once. That's a culture issue. All right. And unless you've ever worked in China and ever worked in Beijing, I'm not talking about having employees in China. I'm not talking about sitting in the US and working with companies in China. I'm talking about working in China. Big difference. All right. And so on a global basis, get and go into the communities in which you work and which you serve. Big difference when you spend some time in Germany. Big difference when you spend some time in Western and Eastern Europe. You pick your country of choice. Same thing in India. Anybody who has spent any time in India knows what's going on right now with the massive amount of people. What is happening in Bangalore and Chennai, it is an absolute crisis that's going on right there. But if you've been there, like I have 60, 70,000 employees like I have, it becomes very personal very quickly. Okay. Sam, I turn it back over to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to spend the hour with me.
It's been wonderful. Thank you very much, Stephen. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you both so much. I was completely fascinated by your discussion, as was our audience. And Steve, there are a couple of questions we weren't able to get to, so I may reach out to you to try and get some answers back to our audience member because they were so fascinated. So our students, first I want to tell our students, please stand by. There will be a QR code for your wheel points, and that slide will show in just a moment when we end the recording. But to everyone else, this is a friendly reminder that the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series takes place on Thursdays at noon Eastern Time, and we aim for the second Thursdays of the month. For more information, you can visit our webpage. We'll also email that to you. Coming next month is Nicholas Callisto, who's the Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Avery Dennison. And we value the feedback that we get from our participants. So we look forward to your responses to our surveys. It's very brief and it includes an opportunity for you to type in topics or speakers you'd like to see featured in the future. And finally, as I mentioned when our webinar began earlier, a link to the archived recording of this presentation will be shared via social media, and it'll be emailed to those who registered, and it will appear on the Business Insights page of our website. So students, stand by for your QR code, and on behalf of Dean Lay's Lifelong Learning Team, I'm Margaret O'Donnell, and I thank our presenter, our moderator, and our audience for joining us today and making it a great Signature Leadership Series. So bye for now, and enjoy the rest of your day.